Hello, Internet. My name is Bernanarchy. Welcome back to Gregtech New Horizons. Last episode, we did some basic oil processing. We got ourselves a little bit of light fuel, which I'm holding here, as well as a sodium persulfate cell. The sodium persulfate is going to be used to etch circuit boards for MV circuits. Before we get into what I want to do this episode, I have one thing I want to follow up from last time, and that is our hydrogen sulfide to sulfuric acid process from oil processing. I decided to use this method, which puts the hydrogen sulfide through water for dilute sulfuric acid and then distills that. That gives us a 50% yield of hydrogen sulfide to sulfuric acid. There is a process that uses a bunch of oxygen to make sulfur dioxide and then sulfur trioxide and then sulfuric acid, and that does yield 1-to-1 for hydrogen sulfide to sulfuric acid at the cost of some extra processing steps and a bunch of oxygen. It's a little bit more of a pain to automate in LV because of how chemical reactors work, where you can only have one real fluid input and everything else has to come through cells. So I decided to go with the simpler automation setup because we're not going to need that much sulfuric acid initially. When we need more, we can switch to more complex processing, but I wanted to go through the process that I'm actually going to be automating so that when I do build the automation, it is the same as what I covered in the video. With that out of the way, let's dive into today's goal. We don't see it here in the quest book because I apparently have not grabbed a glue cell, but we're all the way up through effectively empty circuit boards for MV chips on this side. We have the capability to finish these quests, they just haven't popped yet. The other input to MV chips is diodes, which require gallium arsenide, which require an electric blast furnace. I don't know why I thought I could do this before the EBF, but it absolutely hard requires an EBF. There is not a workaround that I have been able to find. Maybe you can get gallium arsenide from a loot chest, but other than something like that happening, we're absolutely stuck doing the EBF first. So that's what we're going to do today. Over in the multi-block goals tab, there is the EBF quest. This covers everything that we need. For the most part, we have everything that we need already available. The big input that we're missing is nickel. Nickel is needed for the heat-proof machine casings, which are made of Invar, as you can see here. And it's also needed for the cupronickel coil blocks, because cupronickel, as you might imagine, is made with nickel. Everything else in this is very manageable for us at our current tech tier. All of the hatches and buses are made with refined glue, which is a lot of slime balls. I think this is 5 slime balls to make this much refined glue, and we have to do it several times. But since we have a slime tree farm, a few dozen slime balls is not really a concern to me. One way to get nickel is to find an overworld soapstone vein, and I actually have found a soapstone vein. However, the Twilight Forest nickel vein also contains cobaltite. Cobaltite is cobalt, which is necessary for us to make saw blades and a cutting machine, but it is also arsenic, and arsenic is half of gallium arsenide. So we're going to want a little bit of cobaltite anyway for MV chips. So I think what I'm going to do is we're going to hop into the Twilight Forest again. We're going to try to find a nickel vein, and that will get us both a bunch of the nickel that we need as well as a little bit of cobaltite that we'll be able to use in the near future. At some point, I found a little bit of nickel in a loot chest of some sort, so we will go ahead and put this in the ore finder. Other than that, our loadout is pretty standard. I'm bringing along the ironwood pick because we do need that to be able to gather cobalt. We won't be able to do it with our steel tools at mining level 5. So let's head back into the Twilight Forest and see about finding some nickel. Seems like I was wrong about requiring the ironwood pick. That might only be for the nether cobalt ores, not for the ones in the Twilight Forest here, which I'm fine with if it's a little bit easier. That was a successful mining trip. We've got like 16 or so stacks of nickel ores plus 5 stacks of cobalt. So we're going to have no problem getting the EBF done today. I'm going to go ahead and start processing some of these ores, and while we're waiting for them to macerate and smelt, I think we can go ahead and start working on the parts of the EBF that don't require nickel. The various buses are just machine hulls, glue, and chests or tanks in an assembler. So these are all pretty straightforward to put together. The maintenance hatch is just a machine hull with, well, every tool, but it's just crafting using their durability. And the muffler hatch uses a bronze rotor and a bronze fluid pipe, neither of which are very difficult for us at this point. I think the only thing that's new is going to be the lubricant, and we are going to just make this directly from oil. Here's the recipe I was looking for. So that's 2-to-1. So for the 2 cells of lubricant, we're going to need 4 cells of oil in a distillery with program number 24. We've got 8 stacks of nickel. I still have tons of ores. That's just all I decided to refine for now. 8 stacks is plenty for what we need. We're going to need a stack to make the copper nickel wire. Each copper nickel ingot is half copper and half nickel. And then for the Invar ingots, it's 1 nickel to 2 iron. So we're going to need 16 nickel and 32 iron to make the Invar, although I will probably just make extra. So we'll end up with plenty of copper nickel, plenty of Invar. The only thing I haven't touched on yet is this aluminosilicate wool that we need. And we'll talk about that in just a minute once I get the rest of our components sorted out. Our nickel alloys are done and are starting to process down into the intermediates I need. So let's talk about that last ingredient, the aluminosilicate wool. This is an alternative when making the copper nickel coil blocks to mica. I have not found a mica vein yet, and I don't want to go searching for one. So the aluminosilicate wool we can make from nether quartz dust and ruby dust, sapphire dust, or green sapphire dust. For 192 of it, we're going to need 96, so a stack and a half of the nether quartz dust and some sort of ruby or sapphire dust, which is a lot, but I believe I've got it at this point from the mining that I've done. So we're just going to throw all these things in the macerators, wash up the piles, and we should be good to go. All right, we've got our aluminosilicate wool, along with all of our Invar and cupronickel components. We can go ahead and start throwing this into the assembler. Circuit 3. I've already got all of the molten tin we're going to need. So let's just let it go, and we should start to end up with the coil blocks. While those are going, we can go ahead and ourselves make the heat-proof casings. As well, I think we have everything to make the controller block, and we do. And there are the coils. Usually I would grab the loot bags for all quests, but this time I am going to take the duct tape because we're going to need to deal with the maintenance hatch when we set up our EBF for the first time. The last thing we need to figure out for the EBF is how we're going to power it. It's going to need 4 amps at LV to run it, and that would mean 6,000 or so steam a second if we wanted to run it on Steam. As you might guess by what we've been working on, though, my intent is to run it off of light fuel. That means we want to keep pushing forward in the working with oil quests and make a few combustion generators. This says 2. I'm actually going to need to make like 6 or 7 of them. We're going to need 4 for the EBF, plus a few to power the oil refining line. So we can go ahead and say we want like 8 is probably overkill, but we're going to do 8. 8 was not overkill. It turns out we needed 9. 4 for the EBF and then 5 for our processing line. We also need a few ULV tanks. These are mostly going to be used just for converting fluids in and out of cells, as well as 2 distilleries, 2 chemical reactors, and an electrolyzer. In addition to everything we've already talked about, I've got a few more bits and pieces, some item and fluid pipes, some pumps and conveyor modules for the automated oil processing, and I've got a bunch of stone blocks in the digger's backpack. So let's head over to the dirty chunks and start getting our oil-fueled EBF set up. Okay, I believe this is the oil processing setup. Starting at the input, we have a fluid tank with oil. I'm dumping in. I had to move all the oil from where I previously had the pipe ending over to here. So we're still draining out all of those cells. That pumps into this basic distillery, which probably just needs power before it will run. That will output the sulfuric light oil over to this tank. This tank is just responsible for converting that into cells. Here we desulfurize. The hydrogen sulfide fluid goes over to this basic chemical reactor, and the fuel cells come down to this tank where they're emptied, and the empty cells are pushed back up and recycled into this tank. This has a pump on it that pushes the fuel out the back where it runs the generators for all of these machines. The hydrogen sulfide is combined with water here. This tank full of water, again, it's just here to fill cells, and it pushes a cell of water up to this chemical reactor. The empty cells get pushed back down. And then over here, this distillery just takes the diluted sulfuric acid, distills it, and pushes that into this tank. For our hydrogen input to the desulfurization, we have an electrolyzer that pushes its fluid output, the hydrogen, down, and it has a conveyor module that pushes the oxygen cells over to this machine. So as we start adding cells to these machines, well, first we need to add fuel to everything so it can actually kind of start bootstrapping. So let's start fueling our generators. There we go. We might have to feed more fuel into the system, and now that they all actually have a sort of bootstrap amount, I'm going to go ahead and dump the rest of the light fuel into this tank here. And this is just going to start sending it out to these machines, but just because it's hard to tell exactly where the pipes are going to choose to push things, you want to make sure that we have at least a little bit of fuel in every machine before we start. Now that we can get started, we just need to we need to do a couple of things. This distillery needs to have its program set, which I forgot to do. For the sulfuric light fuel, that's program number 2. Oh, and of course we have to skip by program 1. Hopefully it doesn't make sulfuric heavy fuel. Of course it did. That's fine. We'll get rid of that. And now we can auto output to the right into this machine, which has some empty cells. Perfect. Once it hits a few thousand liters of the sulfuric light fuel, that'll get pushed over into this machine. The other place we need to start the bootstrap is up here for hydrogen. We want to have a couple cells going there. And this is a very slow craft. And the last place we're going to need bootstrap cells is here for water. And those should get sent right up here. It does allow input. The conveyors only run every 20 seconds. There it goes. So you just sometimes have to wait for them to decide to fire. All right, we're just waiting for the first hydrogen. There it goes. And we've got our first hydrogen sulfide. Perfect. The empty cell is looping, it looks like. We're waiting for the conveyor again, but that's fine. I think this is good. I think this is going to be making fuel for us. There we go. We've got sulfuric acid, and we don't have the light fuel accumulating yet. It's still buffering in all of these generators. They all have 16 buckets of buffer, so it's going to take just a little bit for all of them to buffer up, and then this will start to give us a little bit of a buffer as well. Since that's looking good, I think we can move on to setting up the EBF. All right. It's formed, but it has problems, and it's expected that it has problems because we haven't done the maintenance hatch yet. So I think we just like... Ah, there we go. Has to be facing the right direction. Now we can hit it with the duct tape, and it should be good to go. To power it, we're just gonna need a couple of 2X cables here. And our 4 generators. And all of those are facing the wrong way. These are all going to slowly start to fill up with fuel now over time. It is going to take a while for us to make, 64 buckets of fuel when we're making it 3 buckets at a time, but fairly slowly at those 3 buckets at a time. But once it's buffered, we'll be making plenty of fuel to run this thing continuously. I'm not worried about that part at all. It's not a pretty roof, but it's a functional roof for now until I can decide how I want the decor of this area to look. I think it's enough of an overhang on every side that none of the machines are going to catch fire and explode. All these combustion generators do have at least a little bit of fuel in them. I'd like to see them have a little bit more fuel in them before I decide to actually turn them on. But I think this is working. This is our oil-powered electric blast furnace, and it is ready to go for us to start using it. But of course, that will be next week. Next episode, we will pick up where we left off trying to get the gallium arsenide crystals into diodes and ultimately the basic circuit assembler. The EBF is a little bit earlier than I had intended to do it, but it is a huge milestone and I'm really happy to have it done. It's going to open a lot of doors for us and I'm really excited to see what's next. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a like, and if you're also excited to see what's next, consider subscribing. It really does help small channels like mine, and I will see you next week.